Hello. My name is Harrison Mayuku, and you are welcome to Story World. Michael was a lively and spiritual 10-year-old boy with a smile that could brighten the darkest of days. Every morning, like clockwork, Michael would creep into his parents' bedroom before the sun rose, gently shaking them awake. His mother, Jane, would stir first, and then his father, David, would groggily sit up, both smiling at their son's devotion. "Mom, Dad, it's time for prayer," Michael would say softly, his voice filled with a sense of duty. His parents, proud of their son's faith, would join him in the living room. Together, they would hold hands, close their eyes, and pray for the new day, thanking God for their blessings and asking for guidance in their lives. This routine had become the foundation of their family bond, a bond strengthened by shared faith. That summer, Michael's parents decided to surprise him with something special, a trip abroad to a tropical island, somewhere far from their usual routines, where they could enjoy the beauty of nature, the ocean, and, most importantly, time together as a family. Michael had never been so excited. For weeks leading up to the trip, he couldn't stop talking about the beaches, the boat rides, and the adventure he imagined awaited them. On the day of the flight, Michael woke up even earlier than usual. With his heart brimming with anticipation, he walked into his parents' room for their morning prayer. It felt extra special that day, like the prayer was a protective shield over their journey. "Dear Lord, please keep us safe," Michael prayed. "Watch over our family and guide us on this trip." The flight started off as any normal journey would. Michael pressed his face against the window, fascinated by the sight of the clouds below. He imagined what it must feel like to walk on them, as soft as pillows. His parents sat beside him, talking quietly about the upcoming vacation. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. Several hours into the flight, a sudden jolt rocked the plane. The seatbelt lights flickered on as the captain announced turbulence, asking everyone to remain seated. Michael's heart skipped a beat as the plane shuddered violently. He looked to his parents, who both wore calm, reassuring expressions, though their eyes betrayed a hint of fear. Another jolt hit, harder this time. Michael's hand found his mother's, and she squeezed it tightly. His father reached over, wrapping his arm around them both, trying to shield them from what felt like the plane tearing itself apart. The cabin erupted in panic, with passengers screaming and crying. Michael squeezed his eyes shut, whispering a prayer over and over. "Please God, keep us safe." Then came the final drop. The plane nosedived. Oxygen masks deployed. People's screams turned to chaos, and in that deafening roar, Michael blacked out. Michael woke up to the soft sound of waves, rhythmic and gentle. His head throbbed, his body ached, and his vision was blurry. Blinking against the harsh sun, he tried to sit up but found himself lying on a piece of the plane's wreckage, floating in the endless ocean. His clothes were soaked, and his heart raced as he slowly realized what had happened. "Mom? Dad," he croaked, his voice weak, barely louder than a whisper. But the only sound was the sea, stretching endlessly in every direction. Fear gripped him as he scanned the water. Broken pieces of the plane floated nearby, but no sign of life. No sign of his parents. His throat tightened, and tears welled in his eyes. "Please, God," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Help me." Hours passed, though it felt like days. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Michael's lips cracked from thirst. He drifted aimlessly, too weak to cry any longer. Exhaustion set in, pulling him toward sleep, but just as his eyes began to close, something caught his attention in the distance, a dark outline on the horizon. An island. With renewed hope, Michael forced his body to move. He paddled weakly toward the distant shore, using every ounce of strength he had left. The waves tossed him around like a toy, but he clung to the wreckage, refusing to give up. His prayers became more desperate with every passing minute. "God, please. I can't do this alone. Please help me." As night fell, the island grew closer. The moonlight reflected off the water, guiding him like a beacon. By the time he washed ashore, he was barely conscious, his body battered by the sea. He collapsed onto the sand, too weak to stand. The cool night air brushed against his skin, and with his last bit of strength, he whispered, "Thank you." Michael woke to the sounds of the jungle, birds calling out in the distance, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. His body ached, but he was alive. Slowly, he sat up, taking in his surroundings. The island was lush and green, with towering palm trees and dense underbrush. The ocean stretched out behind him, calm and endless. He was alone. For the next few days, Michael scavenged the island for food and water. He found a small stream inland and ate whatever fruit he could find. The days blurred together, and the nights were the worst, cold and terrifying, with strange sounds echoing through the jungle. Every morning, despite his fear and loneliness, Michael woke up and prayed, just as he always had with his parents. One night, however, something changed. As he slept beneath a makeshift shelter of palm leaves, he dreamed of his parents. They were standing on the beach, their faces soft and kind, but their eyes were distant. His mother spoke first, her voice calm and steady. "Michael, we're here with you," she said. "But you must be strong. You need to keep praying." His father's face twisted into a pained expression. "There is more to come, son. But remember, no matter what happens, you are not alone." Michael woke up in a cold sweat, his heart racing. The dream felt so real, as if his parents had truly spoken to him. He sat up, his eyes scanning the dark jungle around him. A sense of foreboding washed over him. Something was wrong. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the trees. Michael froze, his pulse quickening. Slowly, he turned toward the sound, and there, emerging from the shadows, was a large, wild animal. Its eyes glowed in the moonlight, fixed on him. Panic surged through him as he scrambled to his feet, backing away. "God, help me," he cried out, fear gripping his chest. The creature stepped closer, its teeth bared. Just as it was about to pounce, a loud noise erupted from the jungle, something crashing through the trees. The animal hesitated, growling before retreating into the shadows. Michael stood there, trembling, his heart pounding in his ears. Whatever had scared the creature away was still out there, and it was heading his way. Suddenly, the bushes parted, and a group of people emerged, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Michael stared in disbelief as they approached, rescue workers, their faces filled with relief when they saw him. "We've been searching for survivors for days," one of them exclaimed, kneeling beside him. "You're safe now, kid. We've got you." As they led Michael to their camp on the other side of the island, he looked back at the spot where he had seen the animal, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw his parents standing there, watching over him. Their faces were peaceful, almost smiling. Though Michael had survived the plane crash, he knew his journey was far from over. He had faced unimaginable challenges, but through it all, his faith had kept him strong. And now, as he left the island behind, he carried with him the knowledge that no matter how dark the world became, his prayers would always light the way forward. As Michael was flown off the island and brought back to the mainland, the relief he felt was overwhelming. He had been found. He was safe. But the weight of loss still pressed heavily on his heart. His parents were gone, and despite the rescue, a deep void remained inside him. The world was different now. Michael was met by authorities, doctors, and counselors, each of them trying to help him, but none of them could truly understand the storm inside him. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Michael started to adjust. He was placed in the care of his Aunt Linda, who lived in a quiet suburb. She was kind, loving, and patient, doing her best to make him feel at home, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, after a few weeks at his aunt's house, Michael woke from a strange dream. He had been back on the island, walking along the shore, and in the distance, he saw his parents standing at the edge of the water. But this time, they weren't smiling. His mother's face was strained with worry, and his father's eyes were filled with urgency. "Michael," his father had said, his voice echoing strangely. "It's not over yet. You need to be careful." Michael woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. His parents had spoken to him in his dreams before, but this was different. Their sense of foreboding was stronger than ever, and for the first time since the crash, Michael felt that something dark was following him. The next day, Michael went about his routine with a cloud of anxiety hanging over him. At school, he barely spoke to anyone. His classmates had been told what happened, and while they tried to be kind, he could sense the distance between him and everyone else. During recess, Michael sat alone by the window, staring out at the sky, wondering if his parents were still watching over him. Then, something strange happened. He saw a man standing across the street from the school, a tall figure, wearing a long, dark coat, and staring directly at him. Michael blinked, feeling an odd chill run down his spine. The man's eyes didn't leave him, and for a moment, Michael felt frozen in place. But just as quickly as the man appeared, he was gone, melting into the shadows as if he had never been there. That night, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He sat in his room, trying to focus on his homework, but his mind kept drifting back to the strange man outside the school. Who was he? And why did he feel so familiar? As the days passed, Michael began seeing the man more often, standing at the corner near his aunt's house, at the edge of the playground, even outside his bedroom window late at night. Every time, the man would stand perfectly still, watching, but never making a move. And every time, Michael felt a deep, growing dread in his chest. One evening, Michael decided to tell his Aunt Linda about the man. They were sitting at the dinner table, and as Michael pushed his food around his plate, he mustered up the courage to speak. "Aunt Linda," he said quietly. There's been a man following me." Linda's face immediately showed concern. "What do you mean, sweetie? Where have you seen him?" Michael explained everything, the first time he saw the man outside the school, and how he seemed to appear everywhere Michael went. His aunt listened carefully, her brow furrowing as he spoke. But when he finished, she gave him a gentle smile. "Honey, I think you've been through so much lately," she said softly. "It's not unusual to feel like someone's watching after a trauma like that. Your mind is still processing everything. Maybe it's just your imagination." Michael wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that everything he was seeing was just in his head, a side effect of the plane crash and the loss of his parents. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. He had seen the man, he had felt his presence. That night, Michael had another dream, but this one was different from the others. In this dream, he wasn't on the island. He was back in the plane, in the moments before the crash. He could hear the screams of passengers, feel the turbulence shaking the plane violently, but this time, he saw something new. In the chaos of the cabin, a shadowy figure moved through the aisle, unaffected by the mayhem around him. It was the man, the same man who had been following Michael in the waking world. As the plane plummeted, the man stopped beside Michael's seat. He leaned down, his face inches from Michael's, and whispered something that sent shivers down his spine. "You were supposed to come with me." Michael jolted awake, his heart pounding in his chest. His room was dark, save for the faint glow of the moon outside his window. But something was wrong. The air felt heavy, oppressive. Slowly, Michael turned his head toward the window, and there, standing in the pale moonlight, was the man. This time, the man wasn't standing still. He was slowly moving toward Michael, his eyes locked on him with a cold intensity. Michael's breath caught in his throat, and for a brief moment, he felt paralyzed with fear. But then, in a rush of instinct, he bolted from his bed and ran toward his aunt's room. "Aunt Linda! Aunt Linda!" he screamed, pounding on her door. Linda burst out of her room, her face filled with alarm. "What's wrong, Michael? What happened? He's here? The man, he's here." Michael gasped, his voice shaking with terror. Linda grabbed a flashlight and rushed to his room, her heart racing. But when she flipped on the light, the room was empty. There was no sign of the man. The window was closed, and everything was just as it had been before. "Michael," Linda knelt down in front of him, her eyes filled with concern. "There's no one here. I promise, you're safe." But Michael knew what he had seen. The man wasn't just a figment of his imagination. He was real, and he had followed Michael off the island. Whatever had saved Michael from the crash hadn't been a simple stroke of luck. Something darker was at play, and the man wasn't going to stop until he took what he believed was his. That night, as Michael lay in bed, he whispered the same prayer he had said every morning with his parents, asking for protection and strength. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something terrible was coming for him, and no amount of prayer could keep it at bay forever. The man had claimed that Michael was supposed to come with him. The question was, where? And why had he been spared? As the days turned into nights, Michael realized that surviving the crash was by not the miracle he had once believed it to be. It was something else entirely. And the true test of his faith had only just begun. If you are still here, thank you for watching, and always pray for protection for God Almighty to guide you physical and spiritual.